Guys, tonight we're not descending into the mythical underworlds of ancient lore, nor are we exploring the sun-drenched ruins of forgotten empires. No, tonight, our journey takes us deep into the earth itself, into the black, suffocating heart of the 19th century industrial revolution, the coal mine. We're stepping into the worn, heavy boots of a coal miner, a man whose daily existence was a relentless battle against darkness, danger, and disease, all to fuel the furnaces of a rapidly changing world. This isn't a story of grand adventure or heroic deeds in the traditional sense. It's a testament to human endurance in the face of almost unimaginable hardship. We'll explore why it truly, profoundly sucked to be a 19th century coal miner. A life marked by the ever-present threat of black lung, devastating cave-ins, and the heartbreaking reality of child labor. Tonight's reality check. You probably wouldn't last a single shift, let alone a lifetime. The claustrophobia, the physical toll, the constant dance with death. It's a world that would crush most modern spirits before the first pickaxe was swung. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, please do share your location and local time in the comments. It's a constant source of encouragement to see our community of history sleepers connecting from every corner of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's descent into the darkness. Your day begins not with the gentle light of dawn, but with a bone-chilling darkness that mirrors the subterranean world awaiting you. It's likely well before sunrise, perhaps 4 or 5 a.m., in a cramped, soot-stained cottage in a dreary mining town, a patch clinging precariously to a hillside in Appalachia, Wales, or perhaps the industrial heartlands of England. The air in your small dwelling is cold, damp, and probably carries the faint, ever-present odor of coal dust and unwashed bodies. You are a man, perhaps still young, or maybe already old before your time, your body aching from years of punishing labor. There's no leisurely awakening. A persistent cough, likely the early calling card of miner's asthma, or the dreaded black lung, might be your unwelcome alarm clock. The living conditions in 19th century company-owned mining towns were notoriously poor, characterized by overcrowded, poorly constructed housing, inadequate sanitation, and a general atmosphere of poverty and hardship, all controlled by the mining company. You rise from a shared bed, perhaps a straw-filled mattress on the floor, a space you might share with several of your children or other family members. The room is sparsely furnished, the walls thin. The first order of business is to prepare for the pit. There's no hot shower, no clean change of clothes in the modern sense. You pull on the same rough coal-stained woolen or canvas trousers and shirt you wore yesterday, and the day before that. These clothes are stiff with grime and sweat, offering little comfort, but some meager protection against the abrasions and dampness of the mine. Your wife, if you have one, might already be up preparing a meager breakfast, perhaps some bread, a bit of porridge, or leftover potatoes, washed down with weak tea or chicory coffee. It's fuel, nothing more, for the grueling 10 to 12-hour shift that lies ahead. Historians of labor and industry often emphasize the cyclical poverty that trapped mining families for generations. With low wages, high prices at the company store, and few alternative employment opportunities, creating a state of near feudal dependency on the mine owners. As you eat, there's little conversation, just the weary resignation of another day to be endured. You might glance at your children, some of whom, if they are old enough, and old enough could mean as young as 7 or 8, will be joining you in the darkness of the mind. It's a grim legacy you pass on, not by choice, but by necessity. A quirky, or rather, grimly practical item you might check before leaving is your snap or bait tin, a small metal container holding your midday meal, usually just a hunk of bread, perhaps a bit of cheese or cold bacon if you're lucky. This is all you'll have to sustain you through a long day of back-breaking labor. As you step out of your cottage into the pre-dawn gloom, the air already thick with coal smoke from countless chimneys, you join a river of other dark figures, men and boys all heading in the same direction, towards the gaping maw of the mine entrance. The colliery head frame a stark, skeletal silhouette against the first faint light of a day you will largely miss. The whistle blows, a mournful sound echoing through the valley, a summons to your subterranean purgatory. The meager, starchy breakfast you choked down an hour ago is already a distant memory as you approach the colliery, the sprawling complex of buildings, machinery, and slag heaps that marks the entrance to your daily tomb. Before you can descend into the earth, there's the ritual of collecting your lamp. In the 19th century, before the widespread adoption of electric cap lamps, which came much later, miners relied on open-flame oil lamps, or, in gassier mines, the slightly safer but still dangerous Davy lamp, invented by Sir Humphrey Davy in 1815, which used a wire gauze screen to prevent the flame from igniting airborne methane. For you, a common miner, it's likely a simple oil lamp, a small metal vessel, with a wick and a hook to attach it to your cap or a nearby timber. Its flickering, sputtering flame will be your only source of light in the oppressive darkness below, casting eerie dancing shadows on the coal-black walls. You join the queue of other miners, men and boys, their faces already smudged with coal dust, even before the shift begins. There's a gruff exchange of words, a cough, a spit. The air is thick with the smell of coal, machine oil, and unwashed bodies. You receive your lamp, check the oil level, trim the wick. This small, feeble flame is your lifeline, your only defense against an impenetrable blackness that can swallow you whole. If it goes out, you are lost, blind, and utterly alone until someone, perhaps, stumbles upon you. The lamp is also a constant source of danger. An errant spark from an open flame lamp in a gassy section of the mine could trigger a catastrophic explosion, killing dozens, even hundreds, in an instant. The Davy lamp, while safer, still required careful handling and maintenance, and even it was not foolproof. As you wait for your turn to descend, you might see the previous shift emerging from the mine shaft, figures caked in black dust from head to toe, their eyes hollow in the faint morning light, their bodies stooped with exhaustion. They are a grim preview of what awaits you and what you will look like in 10 or 12 hours. There's little camaraderie, just a shared, weary understanding of the brutal calculus of coal mining, a day's dangerous labor for a pittance of pay. Labor historians often describe the intense bonds that could form between miners who faced constant danger together, a pitmatic culture of mutual reliance and shared risk, but also the harsh, competitive realities of piecework pay and the ever-present threat of unemployment or injury. A quirky, or rather essential, part of your pre-descent routine might involve checking the fireman or deputy, a skilled miner tasked with inspecting the workings for gas before the main shift entered. He would often use a special lamp to detect methane, or even more daringly, a naked flame on a long pole to burn off small accumulations of gas, a practice fraught with peril. His all clear was a fragile assurance in a fundamentally unsafe environment. You, a modern man accustomed to rigorous safety protocols, personal protective equipment, and bright, reliable lighting, would be appalled by the primitive, almost reckless conditions. The flickering, inadequate light of your oil lamp, the constant threat of explosive gas, the knowledge that your safety depends on a thin piece of wire gauze or the tired eyes of a deputy. It would be a recipe for unrelenting anxiety. But for you, the 19th century coal miner, it's just another Tuesday. You adjust your lamp, take a deep breath of the relatively fresh surface air, savoring it, for it will be your last for many hours, and prepare for the descent. The signal is given. A bell clangs, a steam whistle shrieks, and it's your turn to descend. You, along with a dozen or so other miners, men and boys, crowd onto the cage, a rickety, open-sided iron platform, little more than a metal box suspended by a thick steel cable from the head frame, towering above the mine shaft. The descent into a 19th century coal mine was a terrifying experience in itself. A rapid plunge into darkness in a poorly maintained, often overcrowded conveyance, with the constant risk of mechanical failure or objects falling from above. There are no safety harnesses, no emergency brakes you can trust. You just pack in, shoulder to shoulder, the cage groaning and swaying as it begins its journey into the earth. The daylight vanishes with a startling abruptness, replaced by the feeble, flickering glow of your oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls of the shaft as you plummet downwards. The air grows colder, damper, and heavier, with the smell of wet rock, coal dust, and something else, a stale subterranean odor that speaks of confinement and decay. The noise is deafening. The screech of the cable, the roar of the winding engine far above, the clatter of the cage against its wooden guides. You might feel a lurch in your stomach as the cage accelerates, then a disconcerting bump as it passes different levels or landings. You are dropping hundreds, perhaps thousands of feet into the blackness, a journey to a man-made underworld. You can hear water trickling down the shaft walls, feel the dampness seeping into your clothes. The pressure in your ears changes. Younger boys, new to the pit, might look terrified, their knuckles white as they grip the sides of the cage. Older miners might maintain a stoic silence, or perhaps crack a grim joke to break the tension. There's always the fear of the cable snapping, sending you and your comrades plunging to a certain death. Fear of the cage becoming jammed in the shaft. Fear of a sudden rock fall from the unlined walls above. Accidents during ascent or descent were horrifyingly common. Mining accident reports from the 19th century are filled with accounts of cage failures, snapped ropes, and men falling down shafts, underscoring the inherent dangers of simply getting to and from the coal face. You try not to think about it, to focus on the familiar discomfort, the press of bodies, the jolting motion. A quirky, or rather chillingly common sound during the descent might be the dripping of water, which could sometimes freeze in winter, forming icicles that could break off and fall like daggers into the open cage. Or you might hear the scuttling of rats in the darkness of the shaft, creatures that thrived in the refuse of the mine. You, accustomed to the smooth, well-lit, and rigorously inspected elevators of the modern world, would find this daily plunge into a dark, dangerous hole in the ground an almost unbearable ordeal. The claustrophobia, the sense of being trapped, the sheer, gut-wrenching drop. It would be a test of nerve before your workday even began. And then, with a final, jarring thud, the cage shudders to a halt at your designated level. The gate creaks open, and you step out into the oppressive, lamplit gloom of the main haulage road. The journey down complete, the real work and the real dangers just beginning, stepping out of the cage and into the main haulage ways of the 19th century coal mine. The first thing that assaults your senses after the profound darkness is the air itself, or rather the lack of good air. The atmosphere deep underground was a foul, dangerous cocktail of coal dust, natural gases, chiefly methane or fire damp, and oxygen-deficient air known as black damp or sty, making every breath a potential hazard and long-term exposure, a near certain path to debilitating lung disease. There were no sophisticated ventilation systems as we know them, only rudimentary air courses often driven by underground furnaces, or, later, inefficient mechanical fans. The coal dust is everywhere, a fine black powder that coats your skin, your clothes, your hair, and most insidiously, your lungs. It hangs thick in the air, stirred up by every movement, every swing of a pickaxe, every rumble of a coal cart. Your flickering oil lamp illuminates a swirling haze of these tiny particles. You breathe it in constantly, hour after hour, day after day. It irritates your throat, causing a persistent cough, the miner's cough, and it begins its slow, inexorable work of clogging and scarring your lung tissue. Then there's the fire damp, methane gas released from the coal seams. It's odorless, colorless, and highly explosive. Accumulations of fire damp, if ignited by an open flame from a miner's lamp or a spark from a tool, could cause devastating explosions, ripping through the mine workings, killing instantly, and often triggering secondary coal dust explosions of even greater magnitude. The fear of gas was a constant companion. Miners learned to recognize the subtle signs, a change in the flame of their lamp, a peculiar smell, though methane itself is odorless, other gases sometimes accompanied it, or the behavior of canaries if they were used, though this was more common later. And then there's black damp, an atmosphere deficient in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide and nitrogen, often found in poorly ventilated or abandoned sections of the mine. It could extinguish lamps and, more terrifyingly, extinguish life, causing asphyxiation with little warning. Miners would often test for black damp by observing their lamp flame. If it grew dim or went out, it was a signal to retreat immediately. The science of mine ventilation was still in its infancy in much of the 19th century, and providing an adequate supply of fresh air to the deeper, more extensive workings of a coal mine was a massive, often insurmountable challenge, leading to chronically unhealthy and dangerous atmospheric conditions. A quirky, or rather, tragically ironic belief among some early miners was that the presence of certain fungi or pit ponies coughing could indicate bad air, though these were hardly reliable or scientific measures. You, a modern man acutely aware of air quality standards, occupational safety regulations, and the devastating long-term effects of inhaling particulate matter and toxic gases, would be horrified by the casual daily exposure to such a lethal atmosphere. The constant coughing, the tightness in your chest, the knowledge that every breath is drawing you closer to a debilitating lung disease. It would be a suffocating reality, both literally and figuratively. You learn to live with the taste of coal dust in your mouth, the burn in your lungs, and the ever-present fear that the very air you breathe could be your undoing. Having navigated the perilous descent and entered the foul, gas-laden atmosphere of the mine, you now face the core of your existence as a 19th century coal miner. The back-breaking, soul-crushing labor of extracting coal from the earth by hand. In an era before widespread mechanization in coal mining, the getting of coal was almost entirely reliant on human muscle power, using primitive hand tools in cramped, dark, and dangerous conditions. A relentless physical struggle that consumed the bodies and spirits of generations of miners. There are no power drills, no continuous mining machines, no automated conveyors here. There is only you, your pickaxe, your shovel, and the unyielding face of the coal seam. You make your way from the main haulage road, perhaps crawling or stooping through low, narrow passageways, to your designated stall or room, your section of the coal face. The only light comes from your own flickering oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows and doing little to dispel the Stygian gloom. The heat can be oppressive, even deep underground, due to the lack of ventilation and the exertion of your labor. Water drips constantly from the roof and walls, adding to the damp, miserable conditions. You might be working in a space so low you can't even stand upright, forced to swing your pickaxe while kneeling or lying on your side. The work is relentless. You attack the coal seam with your pick, loosening chunks of coal, or perhaps using a hand drill and wedges to break it free. The noise is deafening. The thud of the pick, the scrape of the shovel, the groan of straining timbers, the distant rumble of blasting. If gunpowder is being used, a practice that added another layer of extreme danger. Once the coal is loosened, you must load it, often by hand or with a simple shovel, into a wooden or metal tub or corf, which then has to be moved out of your working area to a collection point. This might involve pushing or pulling the heavy tub along rough, uneven tracks, or even dragging it if no tracks are present. If you are a hewer, your primary job is cutting the coal. Younger boys or potters and drawers might be tasked with the grueling work of transporting these heavy tubs, sometimes harnessed like animals, crawling on all fours through low, narrow passages. The physical demands of 19th century coal mining were extraordinary, leading to chronic injuries, premature aging, and a life expectancy significantly lower than that of the general population. Your muscles scream, your back aches, your hands are calloused, blistered, and often bleeding. Every swing of the pick, every shovelful of coal, is an expenditure of precious, finite energy. A quirky, or rather grimly pragmatic aspect of this labor was the piecework system, prevalent in many mines. You weren't paid by the hour, but by the amount of coal you produced. This created a desperate incentive to work as hard and as fast as possible, often sacrificing safety and your own well-being in the process. A slow day meant less pay and less food on the table for your family. You, a modern man accustomed to ergonomic tools, safety regulations, and perhaps a desk job, would find this sustained, brutal physical exertion in such appalling conditions almost beyond belief. The sheer, mind-numbing, body-breaking toil, day after day, week after week, year after year. It's a testament to the incredible resilience and the desperate circumstances of the men and boys who dug the black diamonds that fueled an empire. The daily, back-breaking labor of hewing and hauling coal in a 19th century mine is performed under a constant, silent, and often invisible threat: the instability of the earth itself. Cave-ins, or roof falls, were one of anide-driven most frequent and deadly hazards in early coal mines, as tunnels were driven deeper and wider into the 18th century earth, with often inadequate and poorly maintained timber supports, leaving miners perpetually at risk of being crushed or trapped by tons of falling rock and coal. Every creak of a timber, every trickle of dust from the roof could signal impending disaster. Imagine yourself working at the coal face. The only sounds the thud of your pick and the scrape of your shovel, amplified in the confined space. Above you, the roof of the tunnel is a patchwork of rock, shale, and coal, precariously held in place by a series of wooden props, or pit props, rough-hewn timbers, wedged between the floor and the ceiling. These are your only line of defense against the immense pressure of the overlying strata, but these props are often made of green, unseasoned wood, prone to rot in the damp mine air, or they might be too few and far between, a cost-saving measure by the mine owners. You learn to listen intently to the sounds of the mine, to the groans and creaks of the earth, trying to sense any warning signs. A sudden cracking sound, a shower of small stones. These could be the prelude to a catastrophic collapse. If a section of the roof gives way, the consequences are devastating. Miners working directly underneath can be instantly crushed, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. Others might be trapped in the darkness, their escape routes cut off by a wall of fallen rock and debris, facing the slow, terrifying death from suffocation, starvation, or their injuries. Rescue attempts, if made at all, are perilous and often futile, hampered by the instability of the surrounding rock and the presence of dangerous gases. Mining disaster records from the 119th century are filled with harrowing accounts of cave-ins, detailing the desperate efforts of rescuers and the tragic loss of life, often leaving entire communities devastated as multiple members of the same families worked and died together in the pits. A quirky, or rather chillingly fatalistic attitude sometimes developed among seasoned miners regarding roof falls. They knew the risks, they saw the dangers every day, but they had to continue working to feed their families. Some might develop an almost sixth sense for an unstable roof, while others simply put their faith in luck or providence. You might tap the roof with your pick handle, listening to the sound it makes. A dull thud might indicate solid rock, while a hollow sound could signal a dangerous void. But these are crude, unreliable measures. You, a modern man accustomed to engineered safety, reinforced concrete, and stringent geological assessments, would be in a state of constant, high-alert terror. The oppressive weight of the earth above you, the fragility of the timber supports, the knowledge that at any moment your dimly lit workspace could become your tomb. It would be an unbearable psychological burden. Every shift would be a gamble, every creak a potential death knell. Beyond the insidious threat of roof falls, another, even more sudden and terrifying, danger lurked in the gassy depths of many 19th century coal mines. The catastrophic methane explosion. Fire damp, an invisible, odorless, and highly flammable gas, primarily methane, released from coal seams, could accumulate in poorly ventilated sections of a mine, and if ignited by an open flame from a miner's lamp, a spark from a tool, or even static electricity, it would result in a devastating explosion, a roaring inferno that could kill instantly, trigger massive cave-ins, and unleash further, even more destructive coal dust explosions. For you, the miner, the fear of the gas was a constant, palpable presence, a silent killer that could strike without warning. Imagine working in a section of the mine known to be gassy. You handle your open flame oil lamp with extreme caution, always aware that its tiny, flickering flame holds the power to unleash hell. Or perhaps you are using a Davy lamp, its wire gauze screen offering a fragile barrier against ignition. But even these were not foolproof and could be damaged or misused. You might hear the hiss of gas seeping from the coal face, a sound that would send a shiver of dread down your spine. Experienced miners learn to recognize the subtle signs of a dangerous gas buildup, perhaps a change in the behavior of their lamp flame, which might elongate or burn with a bluish tinge in the presence of methane, or a peculiar lightness in the air. Canaries, as mentioned, were sometimes used, their greater sensitivity to toxic gases providing an early warning. If the canary collapsed, it was time to evacuate, fast. But often there was no warning. A miner, perhaps unaware of the danger or taking a foolish risk, might open his Davy lamp to get a better light, or a falling rock might strike steel, creating a spark. And then, a sudden, deafening roar, a flash of intense heat, and a concussive blast wave that tears through the tunnels, ripping out timber supports, hurling bodies and equipment like toys, and instantly igniting the fine coal dust suspended in the air. This secondary coal dust explosion could be even more powerful and widespread than the initial gas ignition, propagating through miles of mine workings, leaving a trail of unimaginable death and destruction. The history of 19th century coal mining is tragically punctuated by major mine explosions that claimed hundreds, sometimes thousands, of lives in a single event. Disasters like the Courrières mine disaster in France, 1906, though slightly outside the 19th century, it exemplifies the danger. Or numerous similar tragedies in Britain and the United States. A quirky, or rather, horrifyingly vivid description, often given by survivors of mine. Explosions was the sound of the afterdamp, rushing through the tunnels, a toxic mixture of gases, primarily carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, created by the explosion, which would suffocate any miners who had survived the initial blast and fire. You, even if you somehow survived the explosion itself, would then face this new, invisible killer. The sheer, random terror of a methane explosion. The knowledge that your life could be extinguished in an instant by an unseen, odorless enemy would be a constant source of profound anxiety. Every day you entered the pit, you knew you might not come out, a victim not of a cave-in or a rock fall, but of the very air you breathed, transformed in a heartbeat into a roaring, fiery demon. If the threats of gas explosions and roof falls weren't enough to haunt your waking hours and your fitful sleep, another insidious danger lurked in the wet, dripping lower levels of many 19th century coal mines. Flooding, sudden inundations of water, whether from breaching a pocket of groundwater, accidentally tunneling into old, water-filled workings, or heavy rains on the surface seeping down, could rapidly transform sections of a mine into deadly underwater traps, with little chance of escape for the miners caught within. The cold, dark water rising silently in a tunnel was a particularly terrifying way to meet your end. Imagine you were working in a deep heading, perhaps one that slopes downwards. You notice the usual dampness on the floor seems to be increasing, the drips from the roof becoming more insistent. At first, it's just a nuisance soaking your already damp boots and trousers. But then, you hear a distant rumble, or perhaps a sudden gush of water from a fissure in the coal face. The water level begins to rise alarmingly quickly. Panic sets in, the advancing black water. You and your fellow miners scramble to higher ground, if any can be found, or try to make your way back towards the main shaft. But the water is often rising too fast, cutting off escape routes, extinguishing lamps, and plunging you into a terrifying icy darkness. The lack of sophisticated pumping technology in many 19th century mines meant that once a significant inundation occurred, dewatering the affected sections could take days, weeks, or even be economically unfeasible, often leading to those sections and any miners trapped within being abandoned. The struggle against the rising water would be desperate. You might try to build a makeshift barricade or climb onto ledges, but the cold is intense, sapping your strength. The air, trapped between the rising water and the roof of the tunnel, can become compressed and unbreathable. The shouts of your comrades turn to gurgles and then silence. It is a lonely, terrifying death, a slow drowning in the black heart of the earth. Even if you are not directly in the path of a major flood, the constant dampness of many mines contributes to ill health, rheumatism, chills, and an increased susceptibility to lung diseases. Working for hours in water up to your knees or waist was not uncommon in poorly drained sections. A quirky, or rather grimly practical, concern for mine owners regarding flooding was not just the loss of life, which was often callously disregarded as replaceable labor, but the loss of production and the cost of pumping or abandoning a flooded section. Economic considerations often outweighed humanitarian ones. You, a modern man who takes for granted advanced drainage systems and emergency preparedness, would be horrified by the casual acceptance of such a deadly risk. The sensation of cold water rising around your legs in the pitch darkness, the extinguishing of your lamp, the dawning realization that there is no escape. It would be the stuff of your worst nightmares. It's another facet of the daily gamble that was a 19th century coal miner's life, where the earth could betray you, not just with falling rock or explosive gas, but with a silent, inexorable, and freezing tide, while the immediate, violent dangers of cave-ins, explosions, and floods were a constant threat. A more insidious, slow-acting killer stalked every man and boy who toiled in the coal, dust-laden air of a 19th century mine. Miner's lung, black lung, or more formally coal workers' pneumoconiosis. This debilitating and often fatal respiratory disease, caused by the long-term inhalation of coal dust, which accumulates in the lungs, causing inflammation, scarring, fibrosis, and eventually a severe impairment of lung function, was an almost inevitable consequence of a life spent in the pits. There was no cure, and little understanding of its cause or prevention for much of the century. Imagine, year after year, breathing in that fine black dust. At first, you might not notice much, beyond a persistent cough, perhaps a bit of black sputum in the mornings. But slowly, insidiously, the dust takes its toll. Your breathing becomes more labored, especially during exertion. You find yourself short of breath after climbing a slight incline or carrying a heavy load, tasks you once performed with ease. That miner's cough becomes deeper, more rattling, sometimes racking your body with violent spasms. You might try to dismiss it as a touch of the damp, or a bit of a wheeze. But deep down, you and every other man in the pit know what it is. It's the dust claiming you. Medical understanding of occupational lung diseases was still in its infancy in the 19th century, and while the connection between coal mining and respiratory illness was observed, it was often attributed to bad air or individual weakness. rather than the specific pathological effects of coal dust inhalation. As the disease progresses, your lung capacity diminishes. Every breath becomes a struggle. You might develop a barrel chest from the effort of trying to draw in enough air. Even simple activities leave you gasping. You can no longer keep pace with the younger, healthier miners. Your productivity drops, and with it, your already meager earnings. Eventually, you may be forced to leave the pit altogether, too sick to work, becoming a burden on your family. There is no disability pension, no compensation for your ruined health. You are simply discarded, another broken tool of the coal industry. The final stages of black lung are agonizing. Severe breathlessness, chronic coughing, heart failure due to the strain on your lungs, and a slow, suffocating decline. You see it in the older men in your village. Their bodies wasted, their faces gaunt, their every breath a painful rasp. You know that, unless a rockfall or an explosion claims you first, this is likely your own grim future. A quirky, or rather tragically ironic, remedy sometimes suggested for miners' cough was to drink heavily, the misguided belief being that alcohol would clear the lungs, or at least dull the discomfort. Of course, this only added another layer of misery and ill health. You, a modern man with access to respirators, dust suppression techniques, regular health screenings, and advanced treatments for lung disease, would view this slow, inevitable destruction of your respiratory system with abject horror. The knowledge that the very air you must breathe to live is also slowly killing you, day by day, speck by black speck. It's a cruel and inescapable fate. And the sound of that rattling cough, echoing through the dark tunnels and the cramped cottages of the mining patch, would be the constant, mournful soundtrack of your blighted existence. The darkness of the 19th century coal mine was not just populated by grown men. It was also a place of toil and terror for children, some astonishingly young. The widespread use of child labor was a brutal and defining feature of the early Industrial Revolution, and coal mines were among the worst offenders, employing boys and sometimes even young girls in the very earliest days or in certain regions for a variety of dangerous and physically demanding tasks. Their small size and nimble fingers seen as an asset in the cramped confines of the pit. Their childhoods were stolen, their bodies broken, and their futures blighted, all for the sake of cheap coal. Imagine being a boy of 7, 8, or perhaps 10 years old. Instead of attending school, which was often a luxury few mining families could afford, even if available, or playing in the fields, you are sent down the mine alongside your father, older brothers, or other male relatives. Your first job might be as a trapper or door boy. You sit alone in the pitch darkness for 10 to 12 hours a day, next to a heavy wooden ventilation door. Your sole responsibility is to open it when a coal tub needs to pass through, and then quickly close it again to maintain the crucial flow of air through the mine workings. It's a monotonous, terrifyingly lonely job. You have no lamp to save on oil. You sit in the cold, damp blackness, listening to the scuttling of rats, the drip of water, the distant rumbles of the mine, your imagination conjuring all sorts of horrors. If you fall asleep and fail to close the door, it could disrupt ventilation and lead to a buildup of dangerous gases, endangering the lives of everyone in that section. The responsibility and the fear are immense for such a young child. As you get a little older and stronger, you might graduate to being a putter or drawer, tasked with moving the heavy tubs of coal from the coal face to the main haulage ways. This often involved being harnessed, sometimes literally like an animal, to the tub, pulling it along rough tracks, or even crawling on all fours through passages so low you couldn't stand, the tub scraping against your back. The work was brutally heavy, leading to stunted growth, deformed spines, and chronic injuries. Or you might work as a filler, shoveling the coal loosened by the hewers into the tubs. A dusty, exhausting job. These children were paid a pittance, their meager earnings essential for their families' survival. They were subject to the same dangers as the adult miners: cave-ins, explosions, gas, flooding, but often with less awareness of the risks and less ability to protect themselves. Social reformers and government inquiries throughout the 19th century, such as the Ashley Mines Commission in Britain, 1842, began to expose the horrific conditions of child labor in mines, leading to gradual, though often fiercely resisted, legislative changes to restrict or abolish the employment of very young children and women underground. But for much of the century, it remained a grim reality. A quirky, or rather, heartbreakingly common sight in mining towns was that of young boys, their faces permanently smudged with coal dust, already exhibiting the stooped posture and hacking cough of older miners. You, a modern man who believes in the sanctity of childhood and the importance of education and play, would be filled with an almost unbearable rage and sorrow at the sight of these small figures toiling in the darkness. Their lost innocence, their stolen youth, their blighted health. It's one of the most damning indictments of the human cost of early industrial capitalism. And as you work alongside them, or perhaps remember your own childhood in the pit, you understand that the coal that fuels the nation's progress is being dug with the very lives of its children in the perilous, unforgiving environment of a 19th century coal mine. Accidents were not a matter of if, but when. The daily reality for you and your fellow miners was one of constant, unavoidable risk, with severe injuries from rock falls, tool mishaps, machinery malfunctions, and a myriad of other hazards being an almost routine occurrence, compounded by a near-total lack of organized medical care or first aid facilities within the pit itself. If you were injured, your survival often depended on the quick thinking and strong stomachs of your workmates, and a very large dose of luck. Imagine the scene: a loose rock dislodged from the roof by a nearby blast, or simply the constant shifting of the earth crashes down, striking you, or a fellow miner on the head or shoulder, or perhaps your pickaxe slips on the wet coal face, gashing your leg deeply. Maybe your hand gets caught in the primitive gearing of a haulage winch. These are not minor scrapes. These are often serious, life-altering injuries, crushed limbs, deep lacerations, compound fractures, severe head trauma. In the immediate aftermath, chaos and panic might ensue. Your workmates rush to your side, their flickering lamps casting an inadequate glow on the bloody scene. There is no trained paramedic, no emergency medical kit. First aid, if administered at all, is rudimentary in the extreme. A bleeding wound might be staunched with a dirty piece of cloth torn from someone's shirt, or perhaps packed with coal dust itself in a misguided attempt to stop the flow. A broken limb might be crudely splinted with a piece of scrap timber and a leather belt. Getting an injured man out of the mine is another ordeal. He might have to be carried or dragged, often for long distances, through low, narrow, and uneven tunnels, back to the main shaft, each jolt sending fresh waves of agony through his battered body. There are no stretchers designed for these conditions, no smooth pathways. Once at the shaft bottom, he must endure the perilous ascent in the swaying cage, hoping he doesn't lose consciousness or bleed out before reaching the surface. And what awaits him at the pit head? Often, not much more. There might be a colliery surgeon, a local doctor paid a retainer by the mine company, but his skills and resources are often limited, particularly for severe trauma. Amputation, performed with unsterilized instruments, and no effective anesthetic beyond a bottle of whiskey, was a common and often fatal outcome for a badly crushed limb. The records of 19th century mining hospitals and infirmaries, where they existed, paint a grim picture of the types of injuries sustained and the often poor prognoses, with infection being a constant, deadly complication. A quirky, or rather tragically telling detail of mine accidents was the way compensation, if any, was often handled. A severely injured miner, unable to return to work, might receive a tiny one-off payment from the company, or perhaps be offered a less physically demanding and even lower paid surface job, like sorting coal if he was lucky. His family would often be plunged into even deeper poverty. You, a modern man accustomed to workplace safety regulations, emergency medical services, and workers' compensation, would be appalled by this callous disregard for human life and well-being. The knowledge that a single misstep, a moment of inattention, or just sheer bad luck could result in a horrific injury, with little hope of effective medical care or long-term support, would make every descent into the pit an act of desperate courage, or perhaps desperate necessity. The darkness of the 19th century coal mine was not populated by human laborers alone. Sharing the toil and the danger, and often an equally grim fate, were the pit ponies, horses, mules, and donkeys, used extensively underground for haulage. These hardy animals were essential to the operation of many coal mines before full mechanization, dragging heavy tubs of coal along underground roadways, often working their entire lives in the Stygian blackness, subject to the same harsh conditions and risks as their human counterparts. For you, the miner, these animals were often your workmates, their presence a familiar, if sometimes melancholy, part of the subterranean landscape. Imagine the sight of a string of pit ponies, their coats matted with coal dust, their eyes reflecting the feeble light of your lamp, patiently waiting to be hitched to a train of coal tubs. They were typically stabled underground in crude, excavated stables near the main haulage roads, rarely, if ever, seeing the light of day once they were lowered down the mine shaft as youngsters. Their work was relentless, pulling immense loads, often up inclines through narrow, uneven tunnels, for hours on end. They were guided by young drivers or putters, boys who often formed close bonds with their animals, but who were also under pressure to extract the maximum amount of work from them. The ponies were subject to whippings and rough handling if they faltered or refused to pull. They suffered from injuries caused by low roofs, uneven tracks, or runaway tubs. They breathed the same dust-laden, gas-filled air as the miners, and were susceptible to lung diseases and blindness from the constant darkness. The conditions in the underground stables were often appalling, cramped, damp, and poorly ventilated. Food and water could be scarce, especially in poorly managed mines. Many ponies went lame from working on uneven ground or from poorly fitting harnesses. When they grew too old, or too sick, or too injured to work, their fate was often grim. Some might be brought to the surface and sold for slaughter, while others were simply left to die in some disused section of the mine. The use of animals in coal mines, while economically vital for a long period, is now seen by animal welfare historians as a particularly brutal chapter in the history of human-animal working relationships, highlighting the extreme conditions these creatures were forced to endure. A quirky, or rather poignant, detail often recounted by old miners was the intelligence and resilience of some pit ponies, their ability to learn the routes, to sense danger, like an unstable roof, or even to respond to the voices of their regular drivers. Some ponies became beloved, almost legendary, figures in their particular pits. You, as a miner working alongside these animals, might feel a sense of shared suffering, a kinship with these fellow creatures toiling in the darkness. You see their patient endurance, their quiet strength, and perhaps in their large, gentle eyes, a reflection of your own trapped existence. Their eventual, often tragic end would be another grim reminder of the harsh, unsentimental nature of life and death in the coal pit. The whinny of a pony in the darkness, the clatter of its hooves on the rails. These would be among the few non-human sounds to break the oppressive silence of your subterranean world. Your life as a 19th century coal miner doesn't end when you finally, exhaustedly, ascend from the pit at the end of your shift. You emerge into a world that is, in many ways, just another extension of the mine owner's control, the company town, or mining patch. Many coal mines, particularly those in more remote areas, were surrounded by communities built and entirely owned by the mining company. The houses, the store, the church, even the doctor, if there was one, were all company property, creating a closed system where the miner and his family were dependent on the company for nearly every aspect of their lives. This system, while providing some basic amenities, was also a powerful tool of control and exploitation. Imagine walking home, caked in coal dust, your body aching, to a small, identical wooden house, one of many lining a muddy, unpaved street. The house is owned by the company, and rent is deducted directly from your meager wages. It's likely poorly constructed, overcrowded, lacking indoor plumbing or proper sanitation. Water might come from a communal pump, often contaminated. Outbreaks of diseases like typhoid and cholera were common in these unsanitary conditions. There's little privacy, little beauty, just the grim uniformity of a town built for one purpose: to house the workforce that extracts the coal. Your neighbors are all fellow miners and their families, sharing the same hardships, the same anxieties, the same ever-present film of coal dust that settles on everything. The centerpiece of the company town is often the company store, or pluck-me store. This is where you and your family are often forced to buy your groceries, clothing, tools, and other necessities. The company store typically operated on a credit system, with prices significantly inflated compared to independent merchants, if any even existed nearby, ensuring that miners quickly fell into debt to the company. This debt was then deducted from their wages, often paid in scrip, company-issued tokens or vouchers that could only be used at the company store, further trapping them in a cycle of poverty and dependence. It was a system designed to keep the workforce compliant and to extract every last penny from their labor. Social and labor historians have extensively documented the exploitative nature of the company town system, viewing it as a form of industrial feudalism that stifled workers' autonomy and economic mobility. The company often controlled the local school, if one existed, the church, and even the local law enforcement, creating an environment where dissent was quickly and often brutally suppressed. A quirky, or rather insidious, aspect of life in a company town was the lack of real freedom or choice. Your home, your job, your credit, even sometimes your social life, were all dictated by the mine owner. Stepping out of line, perhaps by trying to organize for better conditions or by shopping elsewhere, if possible, could result in eviction from your company house and dismissal from your job, a death sentence for a mining family with no other means of support. You, a modern man who values independence, choice, and the separation of work and personal life, would find the all-encompassing control of the company town and suffocating almost totalitarian existence. It's a reminder that the darkness of the coal mine often extended far beyond the pit itself, casting a long, oppressive shadow over every aspect of a miner's life. After a grueling 10 or 12-hour shift spent in the dangerous, dust-filled darkness of the pit, and a life lived under the thumb of the company town, what reward awaits you, the 19th century coal miner? The answer, almost invariably, is a pitifully small wage, barely enough to keep body and soul together for you and your family, and certainly not enough to ever escape the grinding cycle of poverty. Miners' wages in the 19th century were notoriously low, often based on a piecework system, payment per ton of coal extracted, that incentivized dangerous overwork, and further eroded by deductions for tools, lamp oil, explosives, rent for company housing, and inflated prices at the company store. It was a system designed to maximize profit for the mine owners, while keeping the workforce in a state of perpetual economic vulnerability. Imagine payday. After weeks of backbreaking labor, you line up to receive your earnings. But instead of a handful of actual currency, you might be paid largely in scrip, those company-issued tokens or vouchers, redeemable only at the company store, where prices are jacked up. Or, if you are paid in cash, you first see a long list of deductions. So much for the rent on your squalid cottage, so much for the oil for your lamp, so much for the blasting powder you had to buy from the company, so much for the pickaxe handle you broke last week, and of course, so much to settle your ever-growing debt at the company store. What's left, if anything, is often a pittance, hardly enough to buy the most basic necessities that the company store might not provide, or to save for any kind of future. The truck system, whereby workers were paid in goods or company scrip instead of cash, or forced to spend their wages at company-owned stores, was a common and highly exploitative practice in many 19th century industries, particularly mining, keeping workers in a state of debt peonage. This constant financial precarity added another layer of stress and anxiety to an already brutal existence. A day lost due to illness or injury meant no pay. A slowdown in demand for coal could mean layoffs or reduced shifts, plunging families into even deeper destitution. There was no social safety net, no unemployment benefits, no disability insurance beyond perhaps a meager collection taken up by fellow miners if someone was killed or severely injured. You are entirely reliant on your ability to perform hard, dangerous physical labor, day in and day out, just to survive. The dream of saving enough to buy your own small piece of land, to escape the mines, to give your children a better future. For most, it remained just that, a distant, unattainable dream. A quirky, or rather tragically common, saying among miners was that they owed their soul to the company store, a line immortalized in the song 16 Tons. It perfectly encapsulated the feeling of being trapped, of working endlessly only to sink deeper into debt and dependence. You, a modern man accustomed to minimum wage laws, direct deposit, and the ability to spend your earnings wherever you choose, would find this system of economic exploitation and control utterly infuriating. The injustice of risking your life and health every day for a wage that barely allows you to survive, while the mine owners grow rich from your labor, would be a source of constant simmering resentment. It's a stark reminder that the Industrial Revolution, for all its technological marvels, was built on the bent backs and blighted lives of men, women, and children like you, the forgotten diggers of the black gold. Faced with such appalling working conditions, constant danger, and systemic economic exploitation, it is inevitable that you, the 19th century coal miner, along with your comrades, would eventually seek ways to fight back, to demand a fairer share and a safer existence. The history of the coal mining industry in the 19th century is also the history of the rise of labor unionism, with miners often at the forefront of bitter, protracted, and frequently violent struggles for better wages, shorter hours, safer conditions, and the right to organize. These early attempts at forming unions and engaging in collective action, such as strikes, were met with ferocious opposition from powerful mine owners and often brutal suppression by company-hired guards, private militias like the infamous Pinkertons, or even state and federal troops. Imagine the clandestine meetings held in secret, perhaps in a remote AI-driven or a sympathetic neighbor's cellar, where you and a few trusted workmates discuss your grievances and the possibility of forming a union. The risks are immense. Agitators and union organizers are quickly identified, blacklisted, fired, evicted from company housing, and sometimes beaten or worse. Yet, the desperation is equally immense. You see your children going hungry, your comrades dying in preventable accidents, your own health failing. Something has to change. So, you take the oath, you join the fledgling union, you pay your meager dues, hoping that in collective strength you might find a voice. And then comes the strike, the decision to withhold your labor, your only real weapon, is a terrifying one. It means no pay, no credit at the company store, the threat of eviction, and the very real possibility of starvation for your family. But it also represents a flicker of hope, a desperate gamble for a better future. The strikes themselves are often long, bitter, and violent. Mine owners bring in scab labor, strike breakers, to keep the mines operating. Pitched battles erupt between striking miners and company guards or police. Men are injured, arrested, sometimes killed. Your wife and children face intimidation and hardship. The community is torn apart. Labor historians extensively document landmark mining strikes like the Molly Maguires, actions in Pennsylvania, the Latimer Massacre, or the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike in West Virginia. Events that highlight the extreme violence and repression faced by early labor organizers in the coal fields. Yet, despite the setbacks, despite the brutality, the movement slowly, painstakingly, gains ground. Each strike, even if broken, plants the seeds for future action, raises awareness, and forges a stronger sense of solidarity among the workers. A quirky, or rather, deeply symbolic tactic, sometimes used by striking miners or their wives, was the tin panning or chivalry of strike breakers, surrounding their homes or workplaces, banging on pots and pans, shouting insults, and generally making their lives miserable through relentless noise and social ostracism. You, a modern man who may take for granted the right to unionize and engage in collective bargaining, would be awestruck by the raw courage and sheer desperation of these early labor pioneers. The willingness to risk everything, your job, your home, your safety, even your life, for the chance of a slightly less brutal existence for yourself and your children. It's a powerful reminder that progress is rarely given. It is almost always hard won, often at a terrible cost, by ordinary people pushed to their limits. And in the dark, dangerous heart of the 19th century coal mine, that struggle for dignity and justice burned with a fierce, if often smothered, flame. In the midst of the unrelenting hardship, danger, and struggle that defined your life as a 19th century coal miner, there still existed a unique, resilient, and often vibrant pidmatic culture. A shared world of traditions, language, beliefs, and, importantly, music that helped to sustain the human spirit in the face of adversity. The songs and stories of the coal miners, often born directly from their experiences in the pit and the company town, served as a powerful means of expressing sorrow, anger, hope, and solidarity, creating a rich oral tradition that was passed down through generations. For you, these cultural expressions were not mere entertainment. They were a vital part of your identity, a way to make sense of your world, and a source of communal strength. Imagine gathering in a crowded, smoky pub in the mining patch after a long shift, if you had any money for ale, or perhaps in a neighbor's cottage on a rare evening off. Someone pulls out a fiddle, a concertina, or just starts to sing, their voice rough but heartfelt. The songs tell of the dangers of the pit, of gas explosions, roof falls, and black lung. They lament the low wages and the tyranny of the company store. They mourn lost comrades and celebrate small victories. But they also express a fierce pride in the skill and toughness of the miner, a dark humor about the absurdities of their existence, and sometimes a defiant hope for a better future. Titles like The Blantyre Explosion, The Futility, or Down in a Coal Mine, an actual popular song from the era, would resonate deeply with your own lived experience. These weren't just songs. They were anthems of survival. This culture also had its own unique dialect or pidmatic slang, words and phrases understood only by those who shared the experience of working underground. It was a language born of shared danger and camaraderie, a way of marking insiders from outsiders. There were also deeply ingrained superstitions and folk beliefs associated with the mines. Tales of knockers or Tommyknockers, mine spirits who might warn of danger or cause it, or beliefs about lucky charms and unlucky omens. Folklorists and social historians have collected and studied these mining songs, stories, and traditions, recognizing them as important expressions of working-class culture and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of industrial oppression. A quirky and often very poignant tradition in some mining communities was the miner's canary, not just as a gas detector, but sometimes as a beloved, if tragically utilitarian, pet. The small bird's sensitivity to toxic gases made it an early warning system, but its cheerful song, when all was well, could also bring a fleeting moment of beauty into the grim darkness. You, perhaps a man who finds solace in music or shared stories in your own life, would understand the profound importance of these cultural expressions in a world that offered so few other comforts. The ability to sing about your sorrows, to laugh at your hardships, to share a story that validates your experience. These were not trivial things. They were acts of defiance, acts of community, acts of humanity, echoing in the dark, dusty corners of a world built on coal and courage. And in those shared songs and stories you might find, if only for a little while, a sense of belonging and a flicker of hope that transcended the daily grind. The crushing burdens of your life as a 19th century coal miner did not fall on your shoulders alone. They cast a long, dark shadow over your entire family, particularly your wife and children. While you descended into the dangerous depths of the pit each day, the women of the mining community faced their own relentless struggles on the surface, managing households on starvation wages, raising children in unhealthy and overcrowded conditions, and living with the constant, gnawing anxiety that their husbands, sons, or brothers might not return from their shift. Theirs was a world of unceasing labor, quiet heroism, and often profound grief. Imagine your wife. Her day begins as early as yours, or perhaps even earlier, to prepare your meager breakfast and pack your snap tin. Once you and any working sons have left for the pit, her own grueling workday begins. She must fetch water, often from a distant, contaminated communal pump. She must try to keep your tiny, soot-stained company house somewhat clean, a near impossible task with coal dust permeating everything. She must wash clothes by hand, often using harsh lye soap, her knuckles raw and red. She tends a small garden, if you are lucky enough to have one, trying to coax a few vegetables from the poor soil to supplement your diet. She cares for the younger children, often while also taking in piecework, like sewing or laundry for wealthier families, if such opportunities exist, just to earn a few extra pennies. And all the while, she lives with the fear. Every distant rumble from the direction of the mine, every unexpected siren or shout could signal disaster. She learns to read the faces of the men returning from the pit, searching for any sign of trouble, her heart in her throat until she sees you or her sons emerge, blackened and weary, but alive. The burden of managing the household finances on your inadequate wages falls heavily on her. She must stretch every penny, make impossible choices between food and clothing, or medicine and rent. She deals with the company store, trying to navigate the complexities of scrip and credit, often facing a losing battle against mounting debt. Social historians focusing on women's lives in 19th century industrial communities highlight their crucial, though often invisible economic contributions, their resilience in the face of extreme poverty, and their role as the primary caregivers and social anchors of their families and communities. They were the ones who nursed the sick, including you when the black lung took hold, who comforted the grieving, who tried to instill some semblance of hope and normalcy in an otherwise bleak existence. A quirky, or rather, heartbreakingly common task for mining women was preparing the bodies of men killed in the pit for burial. It was often the wives, mothers, and sisters who had to wash away the coal dust and blood to dress their loved ones in their Sunday best. One last time, a final act of love and dignity in the face of unspeakable tragedy. You, as a miner, might not always see or fully appreciate the extent of your wife's daily struggles, focused as you are on your own survival in the pit. But her strength, her resilience, her unwavering, if often unspoken support, is the invisible scaffolding that holds your precarious world together. Her life, too, is one of relentless toil and quiet desperation, a different kind of mining, extracting hope and sustenance from the barren rock of poverty and fear. In a 19th century coal mining town, the wail of the colliery siren or the frantic ringing of a church bell at an unexpected hour rarely signaled good news. More often, it was the dreaded harbinger of disaster, an accident in the pit, And soon, another grim ritual would unfold. The miner's funeral. Given the appallingly high rates of fatal accidents in 19th century coal mines, funerals were a tragically frequent occurrence. Communal expressions of grief, solidarity, and a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers that defined the lives of everyone in the patch. For you, attending these services for fallen comrades was a somber, all too familiar duty, a moment to mourn, to reflect on your own mortality, and to draw what little comfort could be found in shared sorrow. Imagine the scene. Word has spread through the town. Another cave-in, an explosion, a man crushed by a runaway coal tub. Hope gives way to grim certainty as bodies are brought to the surface, blackened and broken. The next day, or perhaps a few days later, the funeral procession makes its slow, solemn way through the muddy streets. The coffin, a simple wooden box, might be carried by fellow miners, their faces scrubbed clean, but their eyes still holding the shadow of the pit. The entire community turns out, women in their dark, mended dresses, their faces etched with grief and worry, men in their rough Sunday best, their usual gruffness replaced by a somber respect. Children, hushed and wide-eyed, struggling to understand the finality of it all. The procession might be accompanied by a local brass band, if the community could afford one, playing a mournful dirge, the notes hanging heavy in the coal dust-laden air. The service itself, whether held in a small, company-built church or chapel, or even at the graveside in a bleak, windswept cemetery, would be simple and heartfelt. The local preacher or minister would offer words of comfort, speaking of faith, resilience, and the hope of a better life beyond this veil of tears. Hymns would be sung, their melodies carrying a weight of shared experience and sorrow. Fellow miners might speak, offering a few rough-hewn words of tribute to their fallen brother, recalling his strength, his humor, or a shared moment of camaraderie in the darkness of the pit. The rituals surrounding death and burial in mining communities, as documented by folklorists and social historians, often emphasized themes of solidarity, mutual support, and a stoic acceptance of fate, while also sometimes containing subtle undercurrents of anger and resentment at the conditions that led to such frequent tragedies. A quirky, or rather, deeply symbolic element of some miners' funerals was the placing of a piece of coal or a mining tool, like a pick or a lamp, on the coffin. A final tribute to the man's life and labor, a recognition of the harsh calling that had ultimately claimed him. You, standing amongst your grieving comrades, would feel a complex mix of emotions: sorrow for the lost friend, fear for your own safety, a renewed sense of the fragility of life, and perhaps a simmering anger at the owners and the system that seemed to value coal more than men's lives. Each funeral was a stark reminder that your own name could easily be the next one spoken in hushed, mournful tones. And as the coffin was lowered into the cold, hard earth, you would turn away, back towards the pit, back towards the danger. Because for you, there was often no other choice. The work and the dying went on, while you and your fellow miners toiled and died in the dangerous depths. The wider society of 19th century America and Britain often remained blissfully, or perhaps willfully, ignorant of the true extent of your suffering. For much of the century, there was a profound societal indifference, or, at best, a paternalistic and often ineffective concern regarding the appalling working conditions and high mortality rates in the coal mining industry, with real, systemic change, only coming slowly. After decades of struggle, public outcry, and AI-driven disasters that were too big to ignore. For you, the miner, this societal apathy was another heavy burden, a feeling that your life, your health, your very humanity were of little consequence to the distant consumers who benefited from the cheap coal you extracted at such immense personal cost. Imagine reading, if you could read and afford a newspaper, accounts of industrial progress, of burgeoning cities, of steamships crossing oceans and locomotives traversing continents, all powered by the coal you risked your life to dig. Yet, rarely would these triumphant narratives dwell on the human price of that progress. Your world, the dark, dangerous, and impoverished world of the mining patch, was largely invisible to polite society. If it was acknowledged at all, it was often through a romanticized or sanitized lens. The sturdy, honest collier, a figure of rugged, if unrefined, virtue. The reality of black lung, of children crippled by labor, of families devastated by pit disasters, was often glossed over or ignored. Mine owners, with their considerable wealth and political influence, actively worked to suppress information about dangerous conditions and to resist any calls for regulation or reform, arguing that such measures would be too costly or would interfere with free enterprise. It often took major, highly publicized disasters, an explosion that killed hundreds, a cave-in that trapped men for days while the nation watched, to briefly prick the conscience of the public and force some level of government inquiry. Royal commissions and parliamentary committees would be formed. Extensive reports would be written detailing the horrific conditions, and sometimes, very slowly, modest legislative changes might be enacted. Perhaps a minimum age for child laborers, or a requirement for better ventilation or mine inspection. But these reforms were often piecemeal, poorly enforced, and fiercely resisted by the powerful coal industry. The history of occupational safety legislation is a long and arduous one, with the coal miners' struggle for safer working conditions being a key and often bloody chapter in that larger narrative. A quirky, or rather deeply cynical, argument sometimes used by opponents of mine. Safety reform was that miners knew the risks when they took the job, or even that they were somehow inherently reckless or careless, thus absolving the owners of responsibility. You, who faced these dangers daily, not out of recklessness but out of a desperate need to feed your family, would find such arguments galling. The feeling of being unseen, unheard, your suffering dismissed or trivialized by a society that depended on your labor, would be a source of profound bitterness and alienation. It's a stark reminder that progress for some can often mean profound injustice for others, and that the fight for basic human dignity and safety in the workplace is a long, hard, and often lonely one, especially when waged from the dark, forgotten depths of a coal mine, as your long, arduous shift in the 19th century coal mine finally, mercifully, draws to a close, and you ascend from the black depths, caked in dust, your body screaming with exhaustion. You might pause for a moment, if you have the strength, to look at the fruits of your labor, the towering piles of coal, the black diamonds that fuel the relentless engines of the Industrial Revolution. This coal, extracted at such a tremendous human cost, was the lifeblood of 19th century industry, powering factories, steamships, locomotives, heating homes, and generating the wealth that transformed nations. Yet the men who dug it from the earth rarely shared in that prosperity, their lives often a grim testament to the price of progress. Your individual contribution might seem small, a few tons of coal hewn by your own hands. But collectively, your labor and the labor of millions like you literally change the world. Imagine seeing a mighty steam locomotive thundering down the tracks, its furnace blazing with the coal you helped to mine. Or a vast factory, its chimneys belching smoke, its machinery clanking and whirring, all dependent on the energy locked within those black rocks. Or a great steamship, its paddle wheels churning, connecting continents, its boilers fed by the product of your subterranean toil. There might be a certain grim pride in knowing that you are part of this immense, world-altering enterprise, but that pride would be inevitably tinged with bitterness, with the stark realization of the disparity between the wealth generated and the poverty you endure. The coal barons, the factory owners, the shipping magnates, they grow rich, while you and your family struggle to survive in a company-owned shack, your lungs slowly filling with dust. This coal built empires, funded innovations, and created a new modern world. But it also consumed lives, destroyed communities, and scarred landscapes. The legacy of 19th century coal mining is a complex, dual one. On one hand, it represents human ingenuity, the taming of nature's resources, and the foundations of industrial society. On the other, it stands as a stark reminder of brutal exploitation, social injustice, and the often terrible human cost of unchecked capitalism. Environmental and social historians continue to grapple with this dual legacy, examining not only the technological and economic impact of coal, but also its devastating effects on workers' health, community life, and the natural environment, though the latter was less of a concern in the 19th century than it is today. A quirky, or rather, profoundly symbolic image might be that of a miner's hands, gnarled, calloused, permanently stained black with coal dust that no amount of scrubbing can remove. These hands, though belonging to a man of low status, often illiterate and impoverished, were the very hands that dug the foundations of the modern industrial world. You, as you look at your own battered, coal-stained hands at the end of another exhausting day, might feel a complex mix of weariness, resentment, and perhaps a flicker of that grim, defiant pride. You are a coal miner. Your work is dangerous. Your life is hard. Your rewards are few. But without you, and countless others like you, the glittering steam-powered world above ground simply would not exist. And that, in its own stark, uncompromising way, is a legacy as enduring and as black as the coal itself. The clanging of the cage, the hiss of the Davy lamp, the thud of the pickaxe, the rumble of coal tubs, the racking cough in the darkness, the mournful cry of the colliery whistle. These sounds of the 19th century coal mine begin to fade, replaced by the gentle stillness of your own time, your own safe space. The oppressive weight of the earth above, the choking dust, the ever-present fear of death. These burdens can now be laid down. You have walked a shift in the boots of a man whose courage was as deep and whose suffering was as profound as the veins of coal he tirelessly pursued. Allow the sheer, unrelenting darkness of that underground world to give way now to a comforting, restful blackness. Behind your closed eyelids, let the memory of that grueling labor, that fight for every breath, paradoxically deepen your own sense of relaxation and gratitude for the ease of your own existence. The struggles of those forgotten miners, their quiet endurance, their AI-driven defiance in the face of overwhelming hardship, can now become a distant, poignant echo, a reminder of the human capacity to persevere. There are no more gas-filled tunnels to fear, no more unstable roofs to watch, no more company store debts to accrue. There is only the profound peace of this moment, the softness of your bed, and the gentle, well-earned invitation to sink into a deep, untroubled, and utterly restorative sleep. The pit has released you. Rest now.